The government has said, well, you don't have to pay your mortgage and you don't have to pay your rent. So
Right.
people's incomes go up, their expenses go down by, let's say, 33%, and the government is paying them to stay home and not produce goods and services.
I saw Biden signed another, I think the 101st or 108th executive action, not order, but action. He declared emergency over the Russian meddling in the election.
It's going to be a huge super spreader event. And the next thing you know, you're going to walk outside and there's going to be body bags.
If it was really a pandemic, they wouldn't have to tell you.
And they can do all these stimulus bills and whatnot because the Fed will just sit back and monetize the debt. And they don't really have to worry about interest rates.
But I also think that if they didn't have unlimited money printing at their disposal, we might not have seen the whole global economy shut down either.
I mean, it's impossible to calculate how distorted our economy is as a result of artificially low interest rates.
Before the Federal Reserve, we actually saw deflation.
But if you look at the difference between U3, U6, and then how those things are calculated, no one in their right mind would say that the U3 number is the actual unemployment rate.
Venezuela is a perfect example because they were one of the richest countries in the world, one of the richest Latin American country, I believe.
That's right.
I mean, they have massive amounts of natural resources, but when they decided to put the crony buddies in to run the natural resources, the production went down.
So we see the financial economy growing and growing and growing. You can create a derivative, you can rehypothecate a treasury, you can make all this fiat money as a result of that, and then actually buy real goods. You can buy property, you can buy commodities, things that are tangible, while at the same time the real economy is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
Right. But we live in a debt-based system today, which means they have to constantly inflate the money supply.
A lot of people think that fractional reserve banking in and of itself leads to runaway inflation and there's no getting away from it, but that's not true. What we had in the early 1800s prior to the Civil War is something called free banking.
I used to watch as a kid the Jetsons, and we dreamed of having a robot clean the house for us. That's deflationary. So it seems like natural law, human ingenuity, leads to deflation, and it goes exactly against the system they're trying to create, which is inflationary. So it's like they're trying to defy natural law. In 2009, after the great financial crash, when the banksters wrecked the entire global financial system, Ron Paul put out a book titled End the Fed. And it was a rally cry to explain what was going on with central banks, how money printing was going to ruin the world. And it brought a lot of attention and it brought a lot of action. And now today, people are focused on what the central bank is doing and they understand the manipulation. Now, there's somebody else picking up that torch and continuing on with the attack or the press back on the Federal Reserve. And that is my good friend, George Gammon, who we're sitting down with today. We're going to talk about what the Federal Reserve does with printing money and what kind of problems that leads to in society. We're going to talk about how they're able to do this or even how they're getting away with it and what he is doing, what regular people can be doing right now to make sure this does not continue. We talk about so much on the macroeconomic scale. You do not want to miss this conversation. I'm excited for it. Let's go ahead and just jump right into it with George. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Market Disruptor Show. And today I am sitting with one of my good buddies, George Gammon. You have probably seen him before, either on his videos or, of course, on my channel. And we're going so deep before we started going, but we need to get recorded now. So we have so much to talk about. It's an exciting show and so much to talk about. But anyway, George, thanks for taking the time to sit down with me today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah. So, you hardly need any introduction. You've been on my show a couple of times, and I'm sure most of my audience already watches your show. But why don't you just kind of tell us what you're focusing on right now? I know you've been moving around a lot. You're kind of there's a couple of big things that are on your mind. Why don't you just kind of give us what you're doing and what you're thinking about?
Yeah. Well, usually I talk about macroeconomics, and I still love that. That's my passion, and I've still been talking about that extensively on my channel. And investing in gold and Bitcoin and stocks and foreign stocks and crisis investing, the Jim Rogers types of things, and kind of Austrian economics and breaking down what the Fed is doing with the repo market, quantitative easing and whatnot. But the last couple of weeks, especially, I haven't shifted my focus, but my thinking has been really around personal freedom and liberty. And that was always a main driver of mine. but it's right in the forefront right now. I was in Phoenix for the last 6 months, which is rare because I don't spend that much time in the United States. But the last few weeks, I had to go down to Tucson, and Tucson is just a complete ghost town. I mean, it's unbelievable. Downtown Tucson. I mean, there's no students. All the shops and restaurants that I used to go to when I was there maybe 3 or 4 years ago are all boarded up. And I mean, it's like something out of Atlas Shrugged. If you read the book or watched those films where, you know, the plywood across the front door says, you know, Tucson, thanks for 40 years in business.
Hey guys, let me just interrupt this interview real quick just to plug the show sponsor, and that is BlockFi. Now, BlockFi is doing amazing things in the Bitcoin finance space. As a matter of fact, they've cracked some really big news by bringing on the ex-CFTC chair, Chris Giancarlo, and they are one of the most transparent, most heavily regulated companies inside the United States, which gives me a lot of trust into what their services are. Now, I've recently did a video talking about how to retire off of Bitcoin, and you can do that by leveraging debt and interest against Bitcoin, and BlockFi is the number one company in the United States, or maybe in the world, to go to and use. They are leading the charge. They're paying interest on your Bitcoin if you park it with them, or you can borrow against it. Now, as I broke down in that video, you can borrow against your Bitcoin. And when you take debt against it, it's not taxable. It's not a taxable event. You can use that debt for anything that you want, including to live off of, to leverage up and buy more, or roll it into another asset. You can do something like I've done recently, like sell some real estate, put that money into Bitcoin. Now, as that Bitcoin price has risen, I'm able to borrow against it and go back and buy the same real estate or something similar. And I still own the Bitcoin, and I also own the new asset as well. Lots of ways you can do this. And BlockFi is the company that I recommend. Down in the description, I have a link that you can click on. If you choose to use that link, you can earn up to $250 in Bitcoin just for using that link. So check out BlockFi now.
So now, sad. Yeah, exactly. And then everyone is just over the top with this, we'll call it the cerveza sickness hysteria. Yeah. You know, people walking outside just with no one within 100 yards of them, and they're wearing 2 masks and a face shield. People driving their car down the street with no one in the car, you know, wearing a mask and a face shield. And you're just like, what is going on here? This is just totally bizarre. And then I went to Idaho to visit a family member. And that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, because prior to, you know, when I was in Phoenix, it was a little bit of an issue. You had to work in the grocery store and the gym. I was like, I don't like this, but it's not the focus of my attention. Mm-hmm. But then when I went to Idaho, I went to Sandpoint. I don't know if you've been there, but no one. I mean, as soon as you cross the border from Washington into Idaho, it's like night and day difference. My driver took me to a gas station there, and I went inside to use the restroom, and I was just about ready to put on the mask. You know, it's almost like a habit when you go into a place and you see the sign on the front there. Yep. So I reached into my pocket. He's like, "Oh, no, Mr. Gammon, we're in Idaho right now." I said, "Well, wow. Okay, what does that mean?" He goes, "No, you don't need a mask here." And these are the good old boys. So you go in, and sure enough, no restaurants, no convenience stores, just the workers aren't wearing a mask. The chef isn't wearing it. The waitress, nobody that I saw wearing a mask. And I went up to Sandpoint. It's the exact same thing there. Even when you go into a coffee shop, the people weren't wearing a mask, which is, you know, generally where those people hang out. And so I was talking to my family members that evening and telling them that, you know, not only do you have to wear a mask on the plane and the airport, but you go to an airport and every 5 minutes they've got that
so bad
script on like a loop, just barking at you to not only wear your mask, but make sure it's over your nose and all these, and it's federal regulation, and you're going to be kicked out of the airport. And every single time you're in a plane now, the gal can't come on and wish you a safe flight or, you know, welcome you. It's just barking instructions at you to make sure that you wear a mask nonstop. And so I was telling my family members this. I was telling them that people in Arizona, as an example, are wearing them outside, are wearing them in grocery stores. They didn't believe me. Huh. They didn't believe me because they haven't been out of Sandpoint since March of 2020. They literally thought I was joking or exaggerating. And I said, no, this is real. And it just goes to show you how important it is, the local environment and the people that are, and the culture of the people around you. But then you start to ask a question. I had done the research, and even I'd look at the John Hopkins website and looked at the data, even from the World Health Organization, and trying to just decipher through everything, right? Trying to be as objective as I possibly could. And you see that this is something from a fatality rate that really only affects people under the age of, let's say, 60 that are overweight or
over the age of 60.
Or I'm sorry, over the age of 60, and or people under that have health issues somehow, overweight, or they have lung issues, breathing issues. And so if you're healthy, it's really barely, it's basically on par with the flu. I mean, it's a little bit worse if you look at the statistics, but not that much. And now all of a sudden you've got a vaccine. So if you want to get the vaccine, if that's your thing, then you can go do it, and more power to you. But then you start to kind of scratch your head and say, okay, well, I'm in Idaho. How bad can this possibly be if my family members, who have lived in Sandpoint, by the way, for 40 years, so it's not like they don't know people there, they just moved there. They've been there for 40, they know everyone in the community. So how is it that this community of, say, 10 to 15,000 people that has tons of tourism, right? Yeah. How is it that they don't even know about it? How is it that the cerveza sickness is such a non-issue up here with zero compliance? I mean, zero compliance.
Right. Yeah.
And then you start to just think, you're like, well, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Like, what is this all about? Then I went to Puerto Rico. And then that was, that was tough.
That was a short trip.
Yeah, I was planning on staying there for a couple of months and hanging out with you and Maloney and Schiff and all the guys. And that didn't pan out because of how strict the regulations are there. They're really, really over the top. So then it really starts to dawn on you that, yes, you want to understand the economic environment around you. You want to understand the world. You want to make, but if you don't have personal freedom, it doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you own. It doesn't matter how much gold you own. It doesn't matter what the value of your stock portfolio or your real estate or the commodities. If you can't walk outside, if you're being locked in your house, you're not wealthy. You're still dirt poor.
No quality of life.
So. Yeah. No quality of life. That's right. So then I started to really focus on, okay, at least for the next 6 months, where can I go that has the most amount of freedom and liberty so I can continue to focus on the building wealth and economics and all the good things that we always love to talk about.
Yep.
So I did a Google search, and Florida was an obvious choice because I was right there in Puerto Rico. And then I Googled the counties in Florida that have not had a mask mandate the longest, or the places that got rid of it the earliest. So Sarasota County, I saw, got rid of it back in January of 2021. So I'm like, okay, that's good. Let's go there and just kind of try to get my bearings. So that's where I've been. And I can tell you, I'm really, really happy with Florida. Relatively speaking, it is a fantastic place to be, but there are little micro cultures or micro ecosystems or environments, just like there are everywhere. As an example, in Miami, it's pretty draconian there, for sure, like California. But you come out here and it's pretty good in Sarasota. You go down to Naples and it's like Idaho in Naples. It's like 2019, where it's just pure freedom. There's a few people wearing a mask, but you have the liberty. They leave the decision making up to you,
right,
as to whether you want to wear one or not, whether you want to close your business, whether you want to stay inside. And again, oddly enough, no, everyone's out, everyone's enjoying themselves, everyone's going to the beach. I mean, if you listen to the mainstream media, if you went outside just one time without a mask, or heaven forbid, you go into a grocery store, or if you have more than 2 or 3 people meet up in the same venue at the same time that are
Right.
that aren't 6 feet apart or whatever. It's going to be a huge super spreader event. And the next thing you know, you're going to walk outside and there's going to be body bags
Yeah.
lining the streets.
If it,
Everyone's
if it was really a pandemic, they wouldn't have to tell you. You would see it everywhere, right? Like there would be bodies piled up. Like in China, the original videos, like people were dropping dead everywhere, right on the street.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have to tell us with the media; we would know.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with the vaccine thing. And I mean, again, I think that's something that if you want to take a vaccine, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. I'm not going to criticize you. It's your decision. It's your body. It should be up to you. Just like taking any drug, it should be up to you. I
Yeah.
personally am going to hold off because I don't really see the value in it for someone who's healthy and 48 years old and is probably a little too thin, if anything.
Yeah.
So the risk reward just isn't there for me when you look at it. But you have, it's the same type of question, Mark, where I see all of these campaigns by celebrities and politicians where they're taking selfies of themselves getting the shot, of course, with a mask on.
They're getting paid for that.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. But then it begs the same question that, listen, if this thing was that bad, I mean, people would be lining up to get a vaccine, even if there was a significant downside in a vaccine that really hasn't been tested that much. Again, it's risk reward, right? If there's a 50% chance you're going to die from the cerveza sickness, well, listen, if that vaccine is, a good example of that is chemotherapy.
Right.
Chemotherapy has a lot of downside.
Yeah.
If your only other option is just to deal with whatever cancer you have, well, you're going to get the chemotherapy, right? And you don't have to pay people to get the chemotherapy. You don't need a political campaign or a media campaign with celebrities,
right,
in order to convince people to get radiation therapy. Or
that's a really good point. I think in the last stimulus bill there was like $1 billion set aside for marketing kind of promotion of this. I mean, crazy that they'd have to spend that kind of money. But those are all good points. I don't want to dive so deep into that. But what I would like to do though is I'd like to kind of take that and pivot it a little bit. And so I want to end up talking about the Federal Reserve. Because there's some big news there. But I think this is a good point that we can use kind of this conversation and segue into that, because it seems like what the Fed has done by creating all this money, they've created fiat money, which has now created this entire ecosystem of fiat food and fiat health. And it's made everybody very short-sighted, right? There's no longer saving, no longer sowing before you reap. And so it's created this whole culture of like instant gratification. Like, I don't need to worry about my immune system. When was the last time you even heard that mentioned on the news, the media, your immune system? But instead, I just want a shot. I just want the magic pill. And I see that. But also something that I'm worried about that I want to talk about for a minute is fiat money. Again, giving the government unlimited power to do whatever they want. And now everything is an emergency. So they're operating under emergency acts, which they believe gives them the power to bypass the Constitution, I suppose.
The Constitution. They don't even look.
So we're operating this in emergency nonstop, so they can basically do whatever they want. Yesterday, I saw Biden signed another, I think the 101st or 108th executive action, not order, but action. He declared emergency over the Russian meddling in the election. So now there's emergency powers over the internet and communications. And this is all fiat money problems, in my opinion. I don't know if you kind of see the same thing.
Well, they can only do that insofar as we don't have inflation. Once we get significant inflation where people see the prices of gas go up every single time they go to the gas station, or they see the prices of groceries go up every single time they go to the grocery store, then that's kind of their kryptonite. But yeah, I mean, until we get to that point in time, then they've got the power of the printer or the printing press, and they can do all these stimulus bills and whatnot because the Fed will just sit back and monetize the debt, and they don't really have to worry about interest rates.
But do you see? But do you see that do you see maybe like I do that their ability to print this unlimited amount of money starts creating all these types of distortions and problems in the market? Do you think these are symptoms of their ability to continue to print trillions of dollars, or no?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you want to go down the list, I mean, it's impossible to calculate how distorted our economy is as a result of artificially low interest rates, quantitative easing, money printing,
right,
stimulus. You've got the distortions in the economy. You've got the malinvestment. You've got a misallocation of resources.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just think about what's happening right now. I just did a video the other day where I studied the income levels for the average American across the United States. And this was not some libertarian website or Austrian website. This was straight from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, so a government website. And they showed that from 2019 to 2020, average incomes in the United States went up by 6.1%.
Okay.
And that's a huge increase. That is a massive increase, especially when you contrast that to the fact that the unemployment rate that we had jumped higher than it did in its very worst point during the GFC, the global financial crisis. So how can incomes be going up? And if we have a 15% unemployment rate, and I realize the headline number has come down, what they call U3. But if you look at the difference between U3, U6, and then how those things are calculated, no one in their right mind would say that the U3 number is the actual unemployment rate. So now it's still, let's say, at 12%, 15%. I mean, you've got millions and millions of Americans that are not working. So by definition, we have fewer goods and services, but we have 6% higher income rates. The savings rates have gone through the roof, while at the same time, the government has said, well, you don't have to pay your mortgage and you don't have to pay your rent. So people's incomes go up, their expenses go down by, let's say, 33%, and the government is paying them to stay home and not produce goods and services. The only path that puts you on is not only the road to serfdom, talking about personal freedom, but it also takes you straight to the path of inflation and society as a whole becoming poorer. So why do I say that? Because one of the, I don't know if it's a technique, I don't know if this was done on purpose, who knows? But unfortunately, majority of Americans believe the amount of currency units you have in your bank account, which, by the way, your bank account is just an IOU from the bank saying that they owe you IOUs, right? Because a dollar is just an IOU. So it's an electronic IOU for an IOU. But most people think that number is wealth. And so if that number increases for society at large, well, therefore we are wealthier because we have more currency units. That is complete nonsense. And if you just take it to its extreme, if you and I were stranded on an island, as an example, and we had a chest full of $1 billion, but there's just some coconuts and salt water, we're extremely poor because there's no stuff. There's just no stuff. And therefore, you don't measure the wealth of a society by how many currency units it has. You measure it by the amount of goods and services it is producing efficiently. And it's obvious that we're producing a lot fewer goods and services. I mean, just for—
What do you mean? We have all kinds of financial services. Don't those count?
And that's a good point. So we see the financial economy growing and growing and growing, that you can create a derivative, you can rehypothecate a treasury, and you can make all this fiat money as a result of that, and then actually buy real goods. You can buy property, you can buy commodities, things that are tangible, while at the same time, the real economy is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. But at some point, there's no more good. There's no more goods and services. Venezuela would be a great example of that. You know, the last time that I went to a grocery, like a normal grocery store, I went in to buy a toothbrush, and this was just like a Smith's. or something like that, or a Safeway, what most people would, there's a mainstream grocery store.
Right.
And usually when you go into a grocery store, you're accustomed to seeing just a unlimited supply of toothpaste and toothbrushes. I mean, it's like a paradox of choice. There's so many of them. Barren, completely barren. There was just like 3 or 4 little toothbrushes hanging on there. It looked like they just got done with a 90% off sale of toothbrushes or something. But you see, my point is, obviously I'm someone that can afford a toothbrush, but it doesn't matter. There's none available. I would challenge any of your viewers or listeners who are living in the United States, especially areas like Phoenix and Tucson, try to get an Uber. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Back in the day, as most of us know, it would take you maximum 5 minutes to get an Uber. Now you're lucky if you can get one in 45 minutes. Try going to a nice restaurant.
Yeah, I just had that problem I was in Jacksonville last weekend, and I couldn't get a ride, and I actually had to book it a couple of days in advance to make sure I could get a ride.
Exactly. Same thing with restaurants. Same thing. So yes, maybe people are getting richer if they own assets, if they own stocks, but their quality of life is deteriorating. And that just goes back to what I'm saying, that we've got to try to get people to think of wealth in terms of goods and services and not in fiat currency units, or the number that's on your bank account. Because if wealth was measured by the number that's in people's bank account, then Venezuela would be the wealthiest country on the planet Earth, because everyone's a trillionaire.
Right.
But you wouldn't want to move to Venezuela.
Right. Yeah, and some of that though too, and I think that's why we spent a lot of time talking about that first conversation, just about freedom and being able to have freedom of choice and things like that, and why that conversation is important, even when we talk about economics. And a lot of times people are like, "Hey, shut up, just talk about money," right? That's what you guys talk about. But these are so intertwined, right? You can't really have one without the other. You mentioned the Road to Serfdom, Hayek's seminal work. I recommend everybody go read that book, because it really lays that case out, right? How economics and policy, social economics, it's all intertwined. You can't have one without the other, because as to your point, wealth is goods and services. And if I don't have freedom to move and freedom to choose and freedom to create, then I don't create goods and services. And so I'm sure you see it on your comments all the time. People say, stay in your lane. You don't know anything about, I did a video about the Paris Accord agreement, not about the science, but about the agreement. And I'm like, oh, you don't know anything about science. I'm like, I know about the agreement, and it's all intertwined, right?
I know about common sense.
Yeah.
That's one thing I know a lot about is common sense. So that's how I typically respond to those.
Yeah, exactly. So you have and you mentioned Argentina or Venezuela, I think, and Venezuela is a perfect example, because they were one of the richest countries in the world, one of the richest Latin American country, I believe.
That's right.
They have massive amounts of natural resources, but when they decided to put the crony buddies in to run the natural resources, the production went down. Now they can't even get their oil out of the ground anymore. And so while they have the resources, they can't even produce them or whatever. And so to your point, right, the real valuable goods and services are just gone. And what do they have left?
Yeah, that's right. And they made some horrible mistakes, but we're going down the same path. I mean, I say that and people kind of laugh it off, but if you think about what happened with Venezuela and their hyperinflation, they built their entire economy around the production of oil, and then they nationalized it, and then they just took all the profits and distributed it. And that's when people like Sean Penn and Bernie Sanders, and they're all going down there and getting their selfies taken with Hugo Chavez, saying that this was the greatest economic miracle for the poor and middle class that the world has ever seen. Okay, fine. But again, you're putting all your economic eggs in one basket. So what happens when the price of oil goes from $100 a barrel down to 25? Your economy implodes, and the only thing that you can do is print money, because you've got dollar denominated debt or whatever. And then you get this hyperinflation type of scenario. So let's think about what's happening right now in the United States. We're just spending trillions of dollars per year in stimulus, quote unquote. And this is this deficit spending that I don't see the government stopping. I think you have to go back and look at quantitative easing. right? Look at QE. When Ben Bernanke first came out and announced quantitative easing, he didn't say, hey guys, this is QE1. He said, hey, this is QE, meaning we only need one. So, but there, sure enough, we have QE2, QE3, QE4. Now we have QE infinity.
Right.
Just think what would happen right now to the United States economy if the Fed just stopped QE, just stopped, done. And then they start doing quantitative tightening just to reduce their balance sheet back down to 800 billion, where it was prior to the GFC. I mean, your viewers who are relatively sophisticated or that watch your show a lot, they know that that would just completely implode the U.S. economy. There would be just this domino effect. Well, it's a lot like, Schiff always uses the term monetary heroin. And I think that's a great way to describe it. What happens is you give the drug addict more and more heroin. And in order to achieve the same effect, they have to take more and more of the drug. And heaven forbid they stop taking the drug. Their body just can't deal with it, and they most likely pass away. And I think it's the exact same thing now with the economy. We've done it with quantitative easing, and now we're doing it with stimulus. Just think what would have happened to the U.S. economy in 2020 if we would not have had the stimulus, if we would not have
never
paid
worked.
people to stay home. Well, we would have got all of that malinvestment and misallocation of resources. We would have got all that bad all those distortions out of the market would have been washed away. We would have had to taken we would have taken the economic medicine, but it would have been extremely painful for 2 or 3 years, but it would have built a solid foundation for us to continue to grow on, instead of just going to rehab. Using that heroin analogy, we just decided to take more and more heroin. We said, okay, we're taking 1 shot a day. Now let's just take 10 shots a day. And oh my gosh, we feel so much better. Well, yeah, we do feel better for a time, for the next year, for the next 2 years. But now all of a sudden, we're going to need to take 20 shots of heroin, 30 shots of heroin until a point where the heroin kills the heroin addict. And it's the exact same thing that's going to happen to the economy now as a result of the decisions we've made, or the government has made in 2020, and continue to make worse today in 2021.
Yeah, it's two sides, right? It's the proverbial ripping the Band-Aid off, right? It hurts, but it's better. But I also think that if they didn't have unlimited money printing at their disposal, we might not have seen the whole global economy shut down either. Right. So if they didn't know they could reinflate it, maybe they never would have shut it down in the first place. So those policies kind of drive each other. One thing I'd like to ask about is it seems that, and I know you've talked about this, right? Before the Federal Reserve, we actually saw deflation. Right. But we live in a debt-based system today, which means they have to constantly inflate the money supply because money is created off of debt. But what I think about is that, these economists can make these complex arguments, but I like to break things down to the most basic first principle levels, right? And we have natural laws of the universe, like gravity. You can defy gravity for so long, but it eventually snaps back. And one of the natural laws of the universe, I believe, just human ingenuity, is deflationary, right? So like I used to carry 1 brick at a time, but I invented a wheelbarrow, right? That was deflationary. I used to watch as a kid the Jetsons, and like we dreamed of having a robot clean the house for us. Like that's deflationary. So it seems like natural law, human ingenuity leads to deflation. And it goes exactly against a system they're trying to create, which is inflationary. So it's like they're trying to defy natural law, which of course leads to distortions. And I think eventually, just like gravity, fails. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, you're using deflation synonymously with productivity. And so
more ingenuity, right?
Be more and more productive. You're using a wheelbarrow instead of your hands. You're being more productive. It reminds me of the story of Milton Friedman when he went to this location. I believe it was in Asia, and he was there with his wife on vacation, and one of the local politicians took him to show off this new jobs program that they had. And all these people, all these guys were out there digging these holes to build this building or something like that, to build a foundation. And they were all using shovels.
Hey, sorry to interrupt this video just one more time. I'm not running Google Ads, so it's actually way less interruption than I normally would have on a video. And that's because it's sponsored by BlockFi. They are opening up the world of Bitcoin and financial products, offering to pay you interest on your Bitcoin, better than owning a rental property that you have to manage and control and have the risks. You can just earn interest on it, or you can leverage against it. Now, I plan to hold my Bitcoin forever and literally never sell my Bitcoin. So how do you do that? Well, if I need money, I don't want to sell that Bitcoin. I'm going to pay tax on it. All right. I'm going to end up with less, and I don't have the Bitcoin anymore. So a better way to do it is to borrow against the Bitcoin. So I've put all my money into Bitcoin. If I want to buy a car or I want to buy a house, I can borrow against it at very, very low competitive rates, get my house, get my car, whatever that may be, and get to keep the Bitcoin. Now, I've done a whole video on this. You can find it. I'll link it down in the description below, how to retire off of Bitcoin without paying taxes. And you can do that with BlockFi services. I'll link to the video down below. I'm also going to put a link to BlockFi. If you choose to click on that link to check them out, you can earn up to $250 in free Bitcoin just for using that link. And that's it. Let's go ahead and get back to the interview.
And Milton Friedman says, that's weird. Why aren't you using a bulldozer or a big machine to do that? And the guy said, oh, no, Mr. Friedman, no, we can't do that because, see, this is a jobs program. And in order to, if we did that, we'd only have 3 or 4 jobs. But now we've got 40 or 50 jobs.
Wow.
And he said, okay, well, if that's your objective, then why don't you just use spoons?
Yeah.
Because then you'd have a whole ton of jobs. But see, most people would laugh that off because of how unproductive it would be and how long it would take you. But it's the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And from the year 1800 to 1900, the prices in the United States, due to productivity and in productivity gains, went down by 50%, 50% over a 100-year period. And I would like to point out that this was during a time of fractional reserve banking. A lot of people think that fractional reserve banking in and of itself leads to runaway inflation and there's no getting away from it, but that's not true. What we had in the early 1800s prior to the Civil War is something called free banking.
Right.
And this is where, and it's not where you get a free checking account. It's basically where the banks are lending at will. They set up their own reserve requirements, and they are lending out more than they have. You know, it's fractional reserve, but the government isn't involved. The government didn't get involved until the Civil War.
Right.
And of course, we didn't have a central bank. But if you think about what was happening back then, is if you owned a bank and you had all of these people depositing their gold with you, base money, and then you were creating currency units and IOUs based on that gold, and then you're creating additional ones to lend those out, but you were responsible. It was your bank. And if the bank goes bust, that means you go bust.
Which they did all the time.
Yeah. So what you do is you'd say, okay, well, my lending standards are going to be really high. I'm only going to lend to someone that I know can pay me back. Right. So they've got to have a great job, or most likely what you would do is you would lend to businesses that want to grow their business and want to create more efficiencies.
Right.
They want to use that money for capital investment. Why?
Not
to create
consumption.
More goods and services. That's right. There you go. To create more goods. So what you had is you had the amount of goods and services in the economy actually expanding faster than the rate of money growth, even though we had this fractional reserve system. So it's not about really the rate of money growth. It sounds crazy, but I'd actually agree with the people, the MMTers, when it comes to that. It isn't necessarily the rate of money growth in and of itself. It's the rate of growth in goods and services relative to the rate of money growth. And if you have goods and services increasing at the same rate or a higher rate, then that's going to give you a price stability, or to your earlier point, a price deflation over the long term, which ironically enough really benefits not the rich, but it benefits them too, but it benefits the poor and the middle class. And it creates a society that really is incentivized to save money. Because, as an example, back in the late 1800s, you could get a 7% real return on your money, because deflation was about 2 or 3%, and you could get about 4 or 5% just by putting your money in a savings account.
Right.
So you could get a 7% return just by putting your money in a savings account. Why on earth would you want to buy stocks? Like,
Right.
why on earth would you want to?
Well, some people might still want to get a better return, but you're not forced to.
That's right. And it would be a very small portion of the population. It would be just the professionals,
Right.
and guys that like the Jim Rogers of the day, those guys I'm sure would still do it. But just the average Joe and Jane, they would have no desire whatsoever.
And let me chase that down for a second, George, because really what happened with money is it allowed for specialization. So I used to have to raise my own cows and my own chickens and make my own clothes and make my own food, all that, right? But when we had money, it allowed us to just be the best cow grower in the world, the best crop grower in the world, and allowed specialization. I believe we've lost a massive amount of ingenuity, a brain drain, if you will, because of this, right? So instead of just being the best brain surgeon in the world and focusing on the best groundbreaking things, I also have to be an investor. So I can't be 100% focused on saving human lives with brain surgery. I have to worry about my portfolio at the same time. And right, if I focus on one thing 100%, that's good. But what if I only put half of my focus there? And so imagine the brain drain that we've lost because of the problem that you're saying. Most people can't just put their money there, right? They have to be forced to be this investor. Anyway, it's an interesting concept I've thought about.
But let's unpack that, because it's a very, very important concept that you just talked about. Let's just take things back to an extremely simple economy. It's just you and I and maybe a couple other people, and we all have our little plot of land, and we're growing the corn, the wheat, the cattle, and maybe the cotton we need to make our own clothes or something like that. And it's really, but we can only make enough to where we're just feeding and providing for our own family. Then all of a sudden, we both go out and we have the ability to make a tool. Well, now all of a sudden, I'm creating double what I need. So then you can go and you don't have to grow all this cotton. You don't have to grow all this wheat or cattle or whatever. You can go do something else. You can become a doctor, or maybe you can specialize in being a construction worker and start to build homes, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other guy down the street can do the same thing. And as I increase my productivity, now all of a sudden I can grow, because I'm producing more than I consume. I'm growing enough stuff or producing enough stuff for the whole entire community to go do other things, to where they don't have to specialize, or they don't have to focus on just their own little plot of land. And to your point, they can be a specialist, which benefits society, makes society wealthier.
Right.
And now what we've done is we forced everyone into being speculators, because you can't grow in fact, you're going to lose purchasing power if you put your money in the bank, because the rate of inflation is going to vastly exceed the interest rate that you're going to get in a bank. And therefore, it's going to take your time and energy away from doctoring. It's going to take your time and energy away from farming, from teaching, from constructing homes, because you have to do all these other things. And therefore, we're producing less stuff, where if we just left it in a bank, done, I got my 7% return.
Yep.
Because we've got 2% deflation and interest rates are at 5%. Now I can spend 100% of my time and energy on being productive at what I'm best, or what I enjoy doing the most. And to your point, then we create more goods and services, we're more productive, and we're richer as a society.
Yeah, and I just want to put a punctuation mark on that. What that entails is me going out and solving problems, right? That's right. Providing value. I'm a servant. I'm out there trying to serve you, solve your problems that you have, and so like that's the ultimate in productivity, right? So it's a big difference. We could sit here and talk for days about all the little ways that this fiat money system just destroys, the world. It's everything, right? From relationships to personal productivity to ingenuity. All these things.
And it's not just fiat. It's also the Federal Reserve and trying to micromanage the economy and create these inflation targets. I mean, even back when we were on the kind of a quasi gold standard prior to 1971, we still had significant inflation because of government and the Fed micromanaging in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, which still started to push people out the risk curve to try to get that return. And, and at the end of the day, the little guy, the average Joe and Jane, they're the ones that get screwed. I was listening to a video the other day of Milton Friedman, who's one of my favorites. I was doing some research for a video. And he was talking about freedom of speech. This interviewer was saying, well, Milton, I know you're kind of a little hard on the United States, but isn't it still the best country in the world? I mean, we have freedom of speech here. I mean, he listed these things. Friedman said, listen, I totally agree with you that this place is the best place on earth, but I would push back a little on some of the things you said. First, freedom of speech. He goes, yes, we have freedom of speech that's written into our Constitution, but in practice, do we really have the ability to say what we want? And he used the example, and this was probably in the 1970s, this interview. And he used the example of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Owning treasuries was the worst investment possible because you had inflation much higher than the rate of return on the treasury you were getting. So you were losing purchasing power. But yet, and I didn't even know this, but yet every single day on the Wall Street Journal, all these banks would come out with these full-page ads trying to push people to buy treasuries. Oh, it's a great investment. You got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. So Milton said that he would call some of his buddies that were head and CEOs of some of these banks, like JP Morgan or whatever. And he'd say, listen, I just saw the Wall Street Journal. You've got another full-page ad trying to push people and your clients into buying treasuries. Mm-hmm. He said, do you buy treasuries? And the guy would say, oh, no way. Are you kidding me? No way. And he's like, well, why not? And he said, because that's a losing trade, or that's a losing investment, because inflation is going to run a lot higher than the interest rate the government's willing to pay you. And he'd say, okay, well, why are you pushing it? Why are you taking out these full-page ads? And they said, because we want to stay in good favor with the government and the treasury.
All the way back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing that over the last couple of weeks, when I talked about all this crazy stuff going to Puerto Rico and all, we're trying to find a little bit of freedom. And I'm sure a lot of your viewers and listeners can relate to this. It kind of feels like you're living in a world that's just been turned upside down, and there's no rational thinking whatsoever. Mm-hmm. People have completely lost their mind. It's like living in a twilight zone. You really can't make heads or tails of it. You don't know what's going to happen. It's very difficult to predict the future or even understand the probabilities. And I found myself in the same thought pattern. But the solution is to just go back in history. Because what we're seeing today, although we like to think it's unprecedented, and it seems like that because we haven't seen anything like this in our lifetimes, trust me, this is not unprecedented. If you read Mises, Hayek, Friedman, Dr. Thomas Sowell, you see that these things have happened in the past. And even with the cerveza sickness, going back to the Spanish flu, I did a lot of research on that. And then you go back to all of the things that we're seeing that we talked about, I think before we started recording, with the mainstream media and how they're trying to push this narrative. And you can't even watch a Star Wars movie, for heaven's sakes, anymore without just getting this woke narrative jammed down your throat constantly to the point where it's just ridiculous. It's like, just time out for a second. Just give me a break from this for just 5 minutes and let me enjoy a movie. And you do the research and you see that this has been done many, many times. This is nothing new. They're just taking a playbook right out of Nazi Germany. And I'm not saying that the global elite and the central planners are Nazis. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is they are using the exact same tactics, whether they're doing them intentionally or inadvertently. I'll leave that up to you to decide and to have your own opinion. But it's when you study it, when you study what well, I don't know, this is going to be on YouTube, so I'll try to keep it YouTube friendly. What the Germans did prior to World War II, as far as their propaganda, they really took kind of a 3 or 4 pronged approach. First and foremost, what they did is they tried to get people away from thinking rationally and put the priority on feelings. Mm-hmm. They really had this campaign to say, you know what, this rational thinking, it's overrated.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's really about how we feel. And therefore, we should take the priority away from thinking and put it on feelings and emotions. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. And then what they did, in addition to that, then what they would do is they engineered this very inexpensive radio, which is kind of a novelty back in that time. So almost every household in Germany had a radio, and then they put them in all the schools. And it wasn't just to hear, you know, the politicians talk and all these things. It was for entertainment. It was to listen to plays, cultural events, music, things like this. But what they would do is they would intertwine kind of the propaganda narrative, the message. And it was very subtle in the early 1930s. And then it became more and more and more extreme, to the point where I read stories in the late 30s about people going into the movie theater, just like watching a Star Wars movie today. And the propaganda at certain points in the movie was so ridiculous, even during a serious film, the crowd would start laughing because it was so blatantly obvious that this was propaganda. And it would actually piss off, you know, the theater owner would tell the propaganda leader, and the propaganda leader would tell Hitler. And, you know, he used to get really, really agitated because the people were laughing at it. And another thing I want to point out too, that when they won the political party and then they turned it into a dictatorship, this was 1933 or 1934. They only won with like a 37% vote. It's just there was multiple parties, so they actually won with 37% of the people voting for them. So a lot of people, and even in the late 30s, you know, a lot of people like to think that all of Germany was just out there, you know, gung ho about Nazi Germany. Not true. Not true. It was just a vocal minority that was able to take over the entire thing. Yeah. And then what they did is they had to create a boogeyman, which
always.
We know who the boogeyman was in Germany. Yeah. Now, what's in, and so you see this playing out with the emotion. You see this playing out with this propaganda just constantly. You can't even watch a basketball game anymore. You can't watch
so
sports.
Bad.
You can't watch anything without this being jammed down your throat. So they're doing the same thing. But now the question becomes, who is their boogeyman going to be? And when I say they, a lot of people kind of use that as an abstract term, but they means the central planners, the World Economic Forum, the global elite, the IMF, the politicians, and the corporate CEOs that have drank this Kool-Aid. Yeah, they're the ones that are really pushing this narrative and trying to create this again, propaganda. And who their boogeyman is going to be, I don't know. But as long as you know what's the power.
Well, I think we see who that boogeyman is, but we won't say that right now.
Yeah, the powerful thing here is that people realize that this is just a story in history, and this is we've seen this play before, and we know how it ends. But it doesn't have to end that way. One of the great things of The Road to Serfdom, which you know, is that Hayek wrote this for one reason, because he felt as though after the World War II, that countries would be incentivized or motivated to use more central planning, because their rationale would be, okay, well, it works great in war, so why wouldn't it work great in the economy? So he wanted to make sure there was a counter narrative there. So he wrote that Road to Serfdom. But then if you look at the path that Russia went down, as an example, the path of Britain and the path of the United States, they were all completely different paths, although at the end of the war, all three countries, the mainstream narrative in society really truly believed that socialism was the path to economic prosperity. So obviously you had Russia go one extreme way, and the United States kind of a little bit went that way, but not too bad. And then the UK was kind of right down the middle. So my point is, if we can understand history, we can understand better what's happening today, and we can better educate our fellow citizens and make decisions that'll prevent us from going down that path and staying on the road to serfdom.
Yeah, great points. I try to almost every video I do, I try to pull in a historical narrative to kind of give that perspective on that. And I also think that's one reason why whatever you want to call it, the progressives, the left, whatever, are trying to destroy history. One, so we don't know it, but two things. One, they don't want us to know how many times it's been tried and failed, right?
Absolutely, good point.
Two, they don't want us to remember how good things were in the past, right? So they want to repaint America as being evil. It was founded on evilness, slavery, whatever. So we don't yearn or dream of going back to the way things were. We have to dream of going forward. So two things. And so I would encourage everyone to go back and study history. Road to Serfdom, as you said. I mean, that's a must read for sure. Also, you talked about them transferring from rational to feelings, to emotions. And I think that's postmodernism, maybe. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about that. I would encourage people just to go and search out postmodernism, Jordan Peterson, and learn more about that. It was really cool. And then I want to transition into something else. Now, you just mentioned something about in Nazi Germany, it was only a small minority, a vocal minority, that really changed things. And there's been studies that have been done, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it only takes a very small minority to actually make change, a revolution in a country, or even just to say that we don't want hormones in our milk. I mean, just a few percentage points of people say they don't want hormones in milk, and now all the milk, the market had responded, or kosher food, or whatever it may be. And so I want to take that piece, and I want to transition into one more thing, because you got a big thing going on, and we don't have a lot of time probably left to talk about it. But it only takes a small minority to make a change, and so it doesn't take a lot. I think it's 15 or 18%, something like that is what the rule was. And then in the Road to Serfdom, I think it was chapter 6, because I've gone back and gone through it a few times. He talks about rules, the rule of law, and how rules and law have to be arbitrary. They have to be set in advance. So it's not up to who goes through it. It's kind of like a basketball game, right? Or a game of poker.
That's right.
Regardless of the hand I draw, the rules are there.
That's right.
And when rules are made arbitrarily, they change them at their whim or for different people, then it creates all kinds of problems. He goes deep into that. But the small minority in that, there's a segue there, and tie all this together, which a lot of this, maybe, as you said, it's not fractional reserve banking. It's not even the fiat money system, but it's really the Federal Reserve. And a lot of what the Federal Reserve is creating all these problems from, well, it starts at the money, but it creates all these social problems and societal problems. Everything, I think, stems from that, even the response we've had to this pandemic. And so if we can go back and change that. Now, again, to your point, it takes a very small minority to do that. And a lot of people, they focus on the problem so much. And you and I, in our videos, we do talk about the problems because we're trying to alert that. But people don't always have good action of what they can do. Right. And you're doing something about that. So maybe let's just talk about that. Maybe there's something that at least people can cheer for, right? We all want that hope, that optimism in a small minority. So why don't you talk about what you're actually doing to maybe try and fix that?
Yeah, we're taking legal action against the Fed. And it goes right back to what you're saying. We have become a nation of men and not of law. And it's got to be the opposite. We need to, the focus has to be on law and the men abiding by law. The sports analogy was just absolutely perfect. You know, if you've got a baseball game, you've got the same rules over and over and over again. And no matter how much someone would want to change the rules, you don't do them. It's still 3 strikes and you're out.
Right.
Well, what we've been doing is we've been ignoring those rules. Those rules are the Constitution
Mm-hmm.
and the Federal Reserve Act. And we've just been, whatever politician, whatever they feel like doing when they wake up in the morning, well, that's what we're doing. Whatever they feel is going to buy them or get them the most votes, then that all of a sudden becomes instant policy. And that's how you get to a dictatorship.
Right.
That's how we get to the road of serfdom. That's how we get a Stalin. That's how we get a Mussolini. That's how these things happen. So my point is I wanted to push back on this and say, listen, no, we've got to at least stand up for what's right. And we've got to stand up for the law to make sure that it's constraining the people who are in power. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that's protecting us from them.
Right.
It's the law, it's the Constitution, and in this case, it's the Federal Reserve Act. So,
but the Constitution is only good if someone actually uses it to restrain them. Right? They're going to run away as much as they can. So we the people have to use that Constitution to somehow restrain them, I guess.
Yeah, and that's not to go off on a tangent, but whenever you hear someone talk about the Constitution being a living and breathing document, that is just utter nonsense. That's just complete nonsense. And that just means they want to ignore it so they can do whatever they think is right, which is the road to hell that's paved with good intentions. But going back to the Fed, when in 2020, I'd always been critical of the Fed as you are, but what they did in March and April of 2020 was so blatantly a violation of the law, of the Federal Reserve Act. They cannot buy corporate debt. They can't buy junk debt. And people say, well, they set up a special purpose vehicle. Come on. Come on.
That's like me hiring a hitman, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it really pissed me off. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're ignoring the law, and this is what protects us from them. But nobody mentioned it. I mean, you and I were talking about it, but I'm talking about the mainstream media.
Yeah.
You would think that CNBC would be shouting it from the rooftops, saying, hey, wait a minute, whoa, time out here. Yeah. They can't buy corporate debt. That's completely against the federal, but they didn't utter a word. Bloomberg, same thing. And I'm like, have we gotten to the point where as a society, if we just think something is good, then we're just going to turn our back on the law and ignore it and say, well, we'll give them a pass this time. I mean, that's a slippery slope. So I was having dinner a few months ago with my good friend, Robert Barnes, who is a high profile lawyer, constitutional free speech lawyer. He's represented some of the, not all, but some of the Covington kids. He represented Alex Jones when Jones sued Twitter, and he's represented Wesley Snipes in the tax thing and whatnot. Yeah. So a lot of these high profile cases, and he's a real smart guy, and he really does know history well. Great lawyer. So I just had this crazy idea. I said, Robert, is there any way that we could push back against the Fed? If we could, not sue the Fed, but if we could, just get them to abide by the law. And he says, well, there is something called the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act, and it's been used successfully against the Fed before. Most people are very positive about this campaign, but a few people push back, said, oh, you're just wasting your time because the Fed has got immunity or whatever. No, not true. There's been Bloomberg, in fact, in 2009, 2010, there were some Bloomberg reporters that actually used the Freedom of Information Act to use the law to their advantage to force the Fed to disclose certain documents. So he said, you can do this. I said, great. Let's figure out how to make this thing happen here. So the stage one is you request documents from the Fed. And basically they tell you to pound sand. Now, if they give you the information, then great. Then we don't need to take legal action, but they most likely won't. So assuming they don't give you all the documents you request, then you go after them or sue them, whatever you want, whatever word you want to use, using the Freedom of Information Act. So that's stage one. So that costs about $100,000 in legal fees. It takes about a year to do this. And so I said, Robert, I'll put up the first 25,000 out of my pocket. And then let's just set up a GoFundMe campaign, because I know a lot of people would want to be a part of this movement. And with the GoFundMe campaign, I said, for every dollar that people put in above and beyond the first 25 that I put in out of pocket, I'll match it dollar to dollar. So when we get to our $100,000 goal, I'll put in 62.5, and everyone else, the community, will put in 37.5, and that's what we'll use for this stage one. And we reached our GoFundMe goal in under 36 hours.
Wow.
And it was, people were really on board, and I'm excited to move forward. It's a lot of people have been warning me that, I'm
you're going to end up like JFK.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it, but yeah, they've been doing it. But hey, listen, I don't know if you said this when we were recording or before, but someone has got to stand up for what is right. And someone's got to stand up for the law that protects us from them. Someone's got to stand up for the Constitution.
Yes. Someone's
got to stand up for the Federal Reserve Act. And at the very least, if this creates awareness, that people that didn't know about the Fed, didn't know about inflation, or didn't understand any of the things that we've talked about in this video, if they just kind of wake up to that, like, oh, well, wait a minute, what is this? What is this Fed thing? What is this George guy, this crazy guy? What's going on here? Maybe that puts them on the path to economic enlightenment, let's say. Maybe that from that they read The Road to Serfdom. Maybe from that they get interested in gold or Bitcoin or some sort of real money that doesn't have this counterparty risk involved to it, something that's deflationary.
Right.
Maybe they start to do, and that was one of the main drivers, in addition to just putting our foot down, that led to this campaign that we're in the middle of now.
Well, it definitely worked with Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul started that in the Fed campaign. I'm wearing the shirt in the Fed, and it brought a lot of attention. I mean, it brought me in. I'm sure it probably brought you in. It brought a lot of attention, brought a lot of people. I always like to reference a quote from Henry Ford 100 years ago, and he said, I'll paraphrase it, but he said, if the people knew how the banking system worked, there'd be a revolution before morning.
That's right.
And so it's just about letting people know how this works. And so, I guess even if you fail, you win, hopefully by getting the media attention that you need. And to your point, we did talk about offline. I mean, it's time for somebody to stand up. The Constitution is only good if someone uses it to restrain these people. And you're putting your money where your mouth is, literally. And so I love to see it. So about a year, I guess, is the time frame that you're looking at to see anything real big happen.
Yeah, right now. In fact, I just spoke with Robert yesterday. He said, anything that you want as far as documents, go ahead and email them to me, because I'm getting a list of what I'm going to initially request from the Fed. So what's kind of cool is I'm actually going to email everyone that through GoFundMe, you can do like bulk emails. I'm going to email everyone that contributed to the campaign and ask them what they would like to request as far as documents from the Fed. So we'll kind of crowdsource that as well. Yeah. And then I'm reaching out to some of our good friends to ask them if there's anything they'd like to throw into the mix. I've reached, I won't name any names, but a lot of the macro big shots on FinTwit, where everyone would recognize their names, and guys and gals that are the smartest people in this business. I've reached out to them, and will be reaching out to them more, and say, hey, if there's anything that you'd like us to request, just let me know. Yeah,
there's a few vocal former Fed insiders, so definitely reach out to those people. They probably know where the bodies are buried.
I will.
Although it's, like you said, a lot of it was 2020 stuff, right? So a lot of it's newer stuff. That's really cool. So where do people go to keep up on this? Do you have a website set up?
I think it's georgegammon.com/end the Fed. I believe that's we've just got it under my URL. What we hit our goal so quickly.
But people want to keep up with it, right? And pay attention.
Yeah, well, what we're going to do for that, Mark, is I'm just going to interview Robert like once every 6 months on my channel,
Okay.
so he can give us an update as to what he's doing legally and how that's, the exact things that he's doing and how the game plan is being executed and kind of where we are along the timeline. And that segues into the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that's the live show that we're doing. And this isn't live like over Zoom or Skype. This is actually real people meeting face to face, enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, it's a live event I'm doing called Rebel Capitalist Live, and it's a conference, a weekend conference where I've got people like you. You're going to be
I'll be
speaker.
There.
Yep, Lynette Zhang. We're going to have Jeff Snyder. We've got Brent Johnson. Several people like that. I've got a few more people that have committed to it that everyone would recognize, but I don't want to say their names yet. One is a very good friend of ours who we visited in Phoenix. That's all I'll say.
That's good.
But
good.
People are really going to love the lineup we have, and you can go to rebelcapitalistlive.com to check that out. That's June 11th through the 13th in Miami. So really looking forward to that. But my point was Barnes is going to be there as well.
Yep.
And he's going to speak for an hour. And the whole topic is going to be this FOIA legal action that we're taking against the Fed.
Yeah, nice. I'll make sure to put the links of both the Rebel Capitalist Live and just for in the Fed stuff in the show notes here. So anybody who's listening or watching, you can make sure to get those links. But that's so cool, George. I think in my experience, and I'm sure the same, I mean, like I said, we spend so much time talking about the problems, and I see the comments, 5,000 comments a week, and everyone's just like, what do we do? What do we do? And so giving somebody something actual, tangible is super, super important. And putting together the Rebel Capitalist Live is also really important because we want to, we want to understand the problems. We don't want to be an ostrich with our head in the sand. But at the same time, we want to have something tangible that we can do, right? Something we can take action on. And so I'm planning on bringing some heat when I'm there talking, and hopefully, everybody that comes will walk away with more knowledge, but not just knowledge that's almost sometimes ignorance is bliss, I guess. I think that only actionable knowledge is power, right? Otherwise, you just fill your head with a bunch of crap.
It's about actionable knowledge. You're going to be getting tons of that, and a lot of things that people haven't heard. A lot of real estate. I didn't mention the real estate guys. Kenny and Hartman are going to be there as well.
Yeah, nice.
Ken McElroy and Jason Hartman. But you're going to get a lot of investments. I mean, this is going to absolutely blow your mind. But I think what's might even be more valuable than that, Mark, is just a group of like-minded, liberty-loving people coming together and enjoying each other's company, networking, and learning as a group, and really feeding off the everyone's positivity, right? I know that you're kind of in a hideout there in a bunker in PR, and I'm in my little Airbnb. As you can see, I'm traveling around trying to rent a house here in Florida, and we're all kind of in our own little world. But I know if I'm ever just like, man, what is going on with the world right now? If I can just get on an hour conversation with someone like you, or someone like Schiff or something like that, you at the end of the conversation, you come away like kind of recharged. Like, right. There's someone else there that gets it. Man, that was such an awesome conversation I just had with Mark, and it just gives you that energy, right? And I think that there's going to be 500 attendees there. We've got, I don't know, like 12 or 14 speakers lined up. And I think that's where the real value is, above and beyond the investment knowledge and the wisdom. And then it's a big social event too. We've got a couple cocktail parties where we do meet and greet, where of course, everyone's going to want to get their picture taken with Mark Moss. So he'll be there taking selfies and having a good stiff drink with everybody.
That's such an important point. I mean, back to kind of recapping kind of what we said, right? Just a small minority to create change, and so obviously we're both doing that through the messaging. But getting together, I believe that to your point, I mean, having these conversations, it really sharpens your viewpoints, and so to go and hear this stuff and then be able to hang out with like-minded people and then discuss it deeper, asking questions, bouncing ideas. And it leaves you with a whole nother level of understanding that you just couldn't get, just watching YouTube videos. And to your point as well, right? I think the saying is something like, to go fast, go alone, but to go far, go with a team. And so to have that community, I've found, I use this analogy in some trainings I do, like a bucket full of crabs. And when a crab is trying to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs are pulling it back down. And, if you go out with your friends and you're trying to get on a diet and they're like, you can skip your diet tonight, or you're training for whatever marathon, and no, you can take the day off tomorrow, you catch up Monday. Right. And so you need to be with like-minded people that aren't trying to pull you back and not intentional. They're just not the same. Right. And so we need people that push us. And so great stuff. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that analogy. And you're, what is the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time with? Something like that. Yeah, I totally agree.
Cool. Well, man, this has been a great talk. We took it all the way from the beginning, real world problems that we're all trying to work on. You mentioned Atlas Shrugged. I was kind of talking to my wife about that the other day, because in Atlas Shrugged, everybody the productive people kept disappearing, and not being taken out. They were going somewhere, right? Right. And then you mentioned I'm in my hideout over here in PR with a few people, and it's a shame that we're seeing these productive people all trying to go and find places, but we'll be in Miami. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign it off. Like I said, I'll put all those down there. Anything else you want to say, closing it out?
No, I just appreciate having me, you having me on your show. And I just love the conversation. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much. All right. Thanks, George.